yes, it really is that close. We've just got to have a look at the opinion polls. Labour's been polling anywhere between 31 and 35%. The Conservatives, in comparison, are doing anything between 28 and 35%. The polls are tight. It's difficult to read this election. So it's going to be an interesting contest, and nobody really knows what the outcome is going to be. Behind closed doors, however, we all know the parties are busy negotiating and looking at their red lines. But on May the 8th, we really don't know who's going to be walking into Downing Street.
The fundamental problem that both Labour and the Conservatives face is that both parties need to win a larger proportion of the seats when they're facing each other than has ever been true in the past. With the rise of the Nationalists, the Liberal Democrats over a longer period, it just becomes much more difficult for them to form a majority. And this feeds into the wider polarisation of British politics. Fundamentally, with Labour and the Conservatives, they're no longer really competing with each other to an extent. Labour's thinking about left-leaning voters tempted by the Greens or the SNP, and the Conservatives are worried about UKIP.
Firstly, I think there's the overarching arguments that have already been made. So if we look at the narrative that has been established, on the Conservative side, economic competence. It's all about the economy. They want to be seen as the party that represents economic competence across the piece. On Labour's side, it's very clear. We are the party on the side of the little guy. We understand the challenges facing individuals and families across the country. And it's very, very interesting to see how that narrative over the years has developed. Ed Miliband was very clear many years back now that he wanted to have that narrative, and he's stuck to it. However, is it resonating, and is it really, really driving home? That will be the challenge.
I think in many ways this is quite a traditional election, so the dividing lines between Labour and the Conservative Party are the same as they've ever been. Labour being portrayed as being economically illiterate, not safe with the economy, and to some extent hypocritical, because they are blaming the Tories for what the Conservatives say were originally Labour mess-ups with the economy. Then on the other side you have the Conservatives being portrayed by Labour as the friend of the rich, the friend of the tax avoider, and the nasty party as well. What makes this particularly interesting election is within those dividing lines there are other dividing lines. The Tories are having to fight two campaigns at once. They're having to fight against Labour in the traditional way I just mentioned, and at the same time they're having to fight on the right of their party against UKIP. Labour, in a similar way, are having to fight the Tories, as I just mentioned, and are having to fight simultaneously in Scotland against the SNP and in the rest of the UK against the growing resurgent Green Party.
I really can't see any single party getting an overall majority, and whichever party gets the majority of votes, I think will have to form a government with some pretty strange bedfellows.
Two things I would say. Firstly, the budget. Look, this is the government's real opportunity to get back on the front foot. It has been a difficult couple of months. We do not want a 2012, we would like to see a 2014. That should be what government ministers are saying across the piece. Let's not forget 2012 was a disaster as far as communications was concerned. Omni-shambles, the pasty tax, issue after issue, and the Chancellor didn't come out of the event in a strong position. 2014 in comparison, annuities reform, it was everywhere. The Labour Party really struggled to get on the front foot. So there's a big opportunity for the government to get on the front foot, and a lot of pressure on the government to do exactly that. Secondly, let's not forget we have a regulatory community, we have a civil service. During this political uncertainty, engage with those communities. Regulators will still be there. Civil service will still be there. It's very important that business takes them seriously and builds the long-term relationships.
I think it's really worrying that there's an extraordinary level of disengagement from the whole thing, almost apathy. And when you actually think this is quite a high-stakes election, there's really a lot at stake in terms of the economic recovery, our future as a member of the EU. So I think disengagement.
UKIP's vote share is going to be absolutely critical in this election, as the Conservatives will hope to benefit from a declining share, which we've seen over the last few weeks. And UKIP is also going to be concerned about the loss of some of the previous positive coverage in the right-wing press that it used to rely upon. It will be interesting to see in the general election campaign whether this trend exacerbates and UKIP returns into the single figures.
One of the real disadvantages for party planners about having a very long election campaign, and by the time this is finished, it will have been going on since January, 5 full months of campaigning. And that's not only tough on the electorate, it's tough on the parties. Keeping on message for that whole period of time is very, very difficult. Plus, my old friends in the media get very bored with covering the same old every day, and they will be especially on the lookout for something to give the campaign that little bit of interest to the public so that they're not getting knocked further and further down the agenda at news conferences.